Hey everyone, welcome back to Wicked Deeds. We're your hosts. I'm Brittany.
And I'm John.
And today we're going to be trying something a little different. As I'm sure you can tell, our content is relatively scripted. However, based on some feedback we've received, it seems as though some folks might be a bit more interested in some unscripted content. And what better way to do that than for me to tell John the story while he has no previous knowledge of what's occurred. You'll be hearing much more genuine reactions and conversations between the two of us. We're really interested to see what you think about this format and if it's something you'd like us to continue doing. Please reach out via email or on our socials to let us know. Also, just a heads up, our new website is under construction and will be out of commission for a little bit, but it should be up and running soon. So with that, I'll stop yammering on and get right into it. Today's case is about the disappearance of Lynn Burdick. Unless you're from the area, you've likely never heard of Florida, Massachusetts, a tiny town with less than 700 residents nestled in the Berkshires. By April of 1982, spring began slowly creeping its way into the quaint Massachusetts town. The snow from the previous winter was melting away, and the fresh greenery of new wildlife had started to peek its way through. The winters can be grueling, but the familiar smell in the air reminded the residents of Florida that the summer months were just around the corner. Lynn Burdick was spending her Saturday night where she often did, at work. She'd been a clerk at the Barefoot Peddler for 3 years now. It wasn't a glamorous job by any means, but the little bit of cash she was able to make working for her cousins, Gary and Suzanne, would help pay for college when she decided to go in a few years' time. She was a senior at McCann Vocational Technical High School, but didn't have any plans to go to college right after graduation. You see, her mother was chronically ill, so Lynn would spend a lot of her free time taking care of her, as well as volunteering for organizations working with individuals suffering from some severe medical conditions, like cerebral palsy, for example. Lynn loved giving back, and she would often spend time bowling with the people she worked with within these charities. If you asked any of her loved ones to describe Lynn, they would always use words such as quiet and shy, but she was also incredibly loving, sensible, and conscientious. Regarding her love life, she really didn't date much, if at all, as it seems as though her time was spent caring for others. She'd give almost all of her time and attention to her family and the charities that she loved so very much. So, as mentioned before, she would work at her family's country store to earn any money she could to pursue her future dreams. Her shifts at the Barefoot Peddler were often spent reading books and hanging out with one of her best friends who worked at the store with her. The place was practically a shack, sitting on the corner of Route 2 and Central Shaft Road in Florida. Lynn didn't drive or have a car or driver's license, but it didn't seem like that was a big deal. Florida was a very small town, and it was pretty easy to get around. Not only that, the location of her job at the Barefoot Peddler was only a stone's throw away from her family's home, which sat on the same street, so it made things that much more convenient.
So what kind of store was this?
It was kind of like a convenience store, almost like a gas station, sans the gas. So anyway, on this particular Saturday night, April 17th, 1982, Lynn was supposed to be working with her friend, but it's reported that there was a bowling tournament in Boston that this friend was attending, so Lynn was going to have to tackle the shift alone. Normally, when it was just Lynn working, her cousin Suzanne would come in and assist, so she wasn't by herself. She didn't love the idea of Lynn working alone. However, on this particular night, Suzanne's child was sick with the flu, so she was stuck at home and Lynn was flying solo. Suzanne felt terrible that Lynn didn't have anyone to work with that night, so she would call the store periodically to check in and see how things were going. That night was particularly rainy and foggy, so there weren't many customers coming in and out. As Lynn sat in the store passing the time by reading a book, around 8 p.m., just an hour before she was set to close up shop, the phone rang. When Lynn picked up the phone, it was Suzanne on the other line again, just checking in before the end of the night. Lynn told Suzanne that it was pretty quiet with customers coming in infrequently. As the two were chatting, the bell for the door rang, indicating that a customer had just arrived. Lynn said to Suzanne, "Can't talk, got a customer," and hung up the phone. Lynn ended the call with Suzanne at approximately 8:10 p.m. It's been reported that during that phone call with Suzanne, Lynn had also mentioned she'd call her back before she closed up later that night, around 9 p.m. So then, around 8:30 p.m., just a half hour before Lynn would finish her shift, her parents phoned the store to see if she wanted a ride home. After all, it was pretty poor weather, and even though it was only a couple 100-yard walk to and from the store, you can imagine she might have preferred a ride rather than getting drenched in the rain. But when they called over to the Barefoot Peddler, Lynn didn't answer. They were sure she'd made her way to work that night, and we already know that Suzanne had chatted with her, so she was definitely there. She likely was just dealing with a customer. She was by herself, and there was no one else there to cash out a customer while she took the time to answer the phone. It's also been reported that one of her cousins, Roy Burdick, who had actually owned the store before Gary and Suzanne did, had made a pit stop at the country store that evening, and he too saw Lynn working. He told the North Adams transcript, quote, "I stopped by with a van full of teenagers because we were having a youth dance that night. She wanted to go, but she couldn't because she had to work. That was her night to work," end quote. Now, what happens next had been reported a bit differently within various publications, both in recent articles and ones from the 80s. The differences are slight, but enough that I think it's important to explain both scenarios. So, in version 1 of what takes place next, Lynn's parents had attempted to call the store and get in touch with Lynn, but were unsuccessful. It's reported that Lynn's parents would go on to send her brother Brian to the store to see what was going on. He then arrived there a short time later to find the lights on, doors unlocked, and no one manning the counter. He immediately tells his family that he can't find Lynn, and they call police. Version 2 of this scenario involved a customer who frequented the establishment, and he is the one that finds things amiss. So the story goes that around 8:40 p.m., this customer walks into the Barefoot Peddler to pick up a few things, and he finds the place empty, with no clerk working the counter, but with all the lights on and doors unlocked. It's been reported that this customer knew the Burdick family and called them up to let them know of the unusual scene at the store. Then, at this point, is when Brian is sent over to check up on things, and when he confirms that Lynn for sure isn't there, the Burdicks promptly call authorities.
So out of those two scenarios, which one do you think is the accurate one?
Like, as in, which one was reported more, or which one I believe is true?
No, which one you believe is true, because if it was put out in multiple publications as, this happened, and they're both conflicting, which one do you think is more accurate?
I mean, I would lean towards it being Brian, because you already know that the parents called the store. They lived a hop, skip, and a jump away, so why not just say, hey, go run down there and see what she's up to, see if she wants you to drive her home. Yeah. So if they're calling at 8:30, she's supposed to leave in a half hour, wouldn't you think she'd be like, oh, just wait, or just come back in 25 minutes and I'll be outside? Doesn't that seem more reasonable?
Yeah, I think the whole customer angle is kind of weird. He would have had to go into the store. There's nobody around. Find the store phone. Know the Burdick's phone number off the top of his head. I mean, back then, I'm sure people remembered phone numbers.
True.
Of course, they remembered them better than we do now, but you would have had to have the knowledge of her working there, been alarmed enough to call and say, hey, I know Lynn's working tonight and she's not here. But then
you have to think, like, if that's the true story, is there something to look into there?
You'd have to be a really stupid criminal to have anything to do with this girl's disappearance and then go back and make a phone call and say, oh my God, I don't know what she has.
Yes,
you know what I mean?
Exactly.
That's just implicating yourself as a suspect. If nobody would have ever known you were there, just go and do it.
Yeah.
Don't go back to the store and be like, oh, where's Lynn?
That's so weird.
Yeah,
exactly.
So,
nope, I totally agree.
I don't know. Just what I was thinking. I don't know if I believe that this guy was there.
Agreed. So once police arrived on scene, the panic began to mount substantially as they were sure Lynn hadn't run off on her own. When walking into the Barefoot Peddler, it at first feels like nothing is off at all, until looking at the counter where Lynn would have been sitting. Her book that she'd been reading was still left open alongside a soda she'd been sipping on through the night. However, her purse and McCann Vocational Tech jacket were missing. There were no signs of a struggle having taken place in the store, and it's also reported that the cash register had been rummaged through, with $187 in cash taken. But the weirdest thing of all is the fact that there was far more cash stored underneath the counter that had been left untouched. Why would Lynn have left and taken such a small stack of cash when there was significantly more that she could have taken that she was aware of. Regardless of this fact, you also can't forget what I mentioned earlier. Lynne was dependable and trustworthy. According to family and friends, she never would have done something like this. It would have been completely out of character for her.
Yeah, I mean, just hearing your description of her, she was shy, she was quiet, she didn't have these love interests. She worked at her family's business. She was always involved in charities and stuff. I don't think this is the type of girl that's going to just rob the fucking cash register and run out the door and go on an adventure with someone.
I think if she were to run away or had something planned out, she would 100% have taken way more money with her. There's no way that she would have just taken $187.
But that's a stretch already because she's not the type. If she's taking care of her mother, she's always involved in these charities and stuff like that. She's not,
exactly.
Just gonna...
I'm not saying I think that. Yeah. I'm just saying if somebody were trying to say like, oh, she totally could have done that as possible. It's like, it's really not.
Yeah.
So
no, it's such a small, minuscule thing that's like, I know when people try to play out scenarios in their head or come up with theories about things, it's totally cool to theorize about things, but you also need to, ground them in reality too. Like, just because something is a possibility doesn't mean that you should really put it forward as something that could have possibly happened. Because if it's like the probability of it is 0.1%, is it really worth putting any investment into that until you've ruled out everything else that's a much greater percentage chance? And like you're making decisions based off this girl's character and all this stuff. It just wouldn't have happened. To me, this seems like somebody came in the door, the bell rings, they come up to the till, she's sitting there with her book, whatever.
What, are you from England? Did you just call it the till?
I guess. I did, but yeah.
You fucking call it the till?
Is that only an English thing?
It's definitely a UK thing.
Shit. Well,
it's the cash register. It's the counter. It's the till in Great Britain.
I don't know why I want to say that, but I think they came in, the thing rang, Lynn hung up the phone, and maybe they took out a gun or a knife or something like that and said, hey, empty the register. Give me all the money. But then if she's giving the money or whatever, maybe they're like, can't leave any witnesses or whatever. Hey, you're coming with me. Grab your shit. I don't know. I think it's also weird too, though. Like if you're taking someone captive, do you tell them to grab their jacket and their purse?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's just a weird set of circumstances.
I agree.
When you kind of lay it out there as the type of person she was said to be, what happened, the disappearance, it's a little strange, but,
Yeah, I agree.
Things you got to think about.
Exactly. Authorities immediately believed that Lynn had been abducted and that she abided by whatever her kidnapper told her to do. More than anything, what truly led police to believe that was the fact that additional money was left behind. Someone attempting to rob the store and abducting Lynn in the process never would have known of its existence. They would have just grabbed whatever was in the register and left. Within the hour, authorities and volunteers alike sprang into action as the news of Lynn's absence spread across the small town. They were made aware of what Lynn may have been wearing and what she looked like. Lynn was described as 5 feet 4 inches tall, weighing approximately 115 pounds. She may have been wearing her McCann Technical School jacket since it wasn't left behind in the store. It was assumed she'd worn it out with her kidnapper as well as her purse. She also would always wear her school class ring, which was described as being engraved, either with her name or initials, it's not clear which, and it housed a blue stone in its setting. She was wearing a gray, blue, and yellow striped button-down shirt under her jacket, along with jeans and white sneakers. So the search was now on for the missing girl. If they could spot anything that looked like what she had been wearing or may have dragged out of the store with her, that might lead authorities to her whereabouts. It's reported that searchers were out looking for her by 9 p.m. that night and would explore areas like Savoy, which was a town south of Florida, along with the Monroe Forest for any clues or evidence. This part of Massachusetts was a pretty heavily wooded area, so there was a lot of ground to cover. Couple that with the poor weather that night, it didn't make the search any easier. As the night grew to dusk the next morning and no signs of Lynn had been found, authorities would beef up their resources and brought in helicopters, planes, and other assets needed to assist in the search for the missing girl. An article published in the North Adams Transcript described the second day of searching for Lynn. It stated, quote, about 45 persons, including members of volunteer fire departments from Florida, Clarksburg, and Rowe, began the search at about 10 a.m. today. A state police helicopter arrived at the Florida fire station at about 1 p.m. to help in the effort, end quote. Not only that, but local pilots would also volunteer their time and aircrafts to assist. But as the searches continued to be lackluster in their findings, the close-knit community felt it needed to do all it could to entice anyone that may know what happened to come forward.
It's interesting to compare this to, our last case with Sharon Thor and how the turnout was from the agency after, the missing girl was reported.
Mm-hmm.
You have to ask yourself, was the response so swift because this girl was clearly at work, somebody had just talked to her, and now, she's missing and money has been stolen from the register?
Mm-hmm.
Was it the link of both crimes that is what set police on the initial search so quickly versus Sharon Thor, who ran out of her house and never came back?
Mm-hmm.
One is much easier to say, oh, she's just a runaway, and that's why, you got to wait a little while because she might come back.
Yeah. Versus
this girl that was, working, just talked to a relative of hers, and now is missing from the business.
Yeah, I mean, it could totally be that. Or, for me, I feel like I just keep leaning on that small town thing where it's like, you think back to Debbie Makel's case and how they alerted everyone, while they're at the football game, and everyone just leaves and they're like, we're ready to search for her because everybody knew her. Everyone probably knew her family. So I think it's kind of the same way here. It could be kind of both of those things. Mm-hmm. They had to have said, like, she would never have done this. Like, we're going to search for her right the heck now.
So more people almost know firsthand how she was, as opposed to just having to listen to, a description by a parent.
Exactly.
Saying, oh, this isn't like them.
Yep.
It's like, no, we all know Lynn because we frequent the store and we know that she's always there and she's always so nice and she wouldn't run away type thing.
Yeah, I think it's more along those lines, at least in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
It's reported in an article published in the Berkshire Eagle on May 5th, 1982, that within the first week of Lynn going missing, the residents of Florida banded together to raise over $2,500 to use as reward money for anyone that came forward with information that led to Lynn's whereabouts. The initial objective had actually only been $1,000, but when that number was surpassed so quickly, the goal was then increased. The money raised would then be placed in a bank account for if and when someone might decide to come forward with valuable information. And something really sweet that was reported in this same article was the fact that some of the most substantial donations came from struggling families. Everyone loved Lynn, and you could tell that they all had strong hopes they might be able to find her if enough money was offered.
Yeah, it's usually the way it goes. It's like the people that always care are the ones that don't have a lot they can put forward, but they'll put forward whatever they can
just to help. Try and help. Yeah, the thing that really got to me was just thinking about forfeiting putting dinner on the table for your kids one night. If it's you know what, we're just gonna have beans or something instead because we wanted to give a big enough donation to help find Lynn.
Mm-hmm.
It just makes me want to cry. People are so nice sometimes. As days go by and searches began to dwindle, authorities would soon uncover a wild scenario that occurred the same night Lynn disappeared that may have a significant connection to her case. A little after 7 p.m. on Saturday, April 17th, 1982, about an hour and a half before Lynn disappeared, a college student was walking in the area of Dodd House, a dormitory located on the Williams College campus in Williamstown, Massachusetts, which is just a town or two over from Florida. As this young woman, whose name has never been released publicly, was walking towards the dorms, an unidentified male stopped her and asked her to take a look at his map and assist with directions. The man then grabbed this woman and attempted to abduct her.
Who needs to ask somebody for directions when they have a map?
I didn't even think of that.
Can you read this map better than me, please?
Oh my God. That never, not one time, crossed my mind.
It just popped into my head, too. I was like, wait. He brings up a map and is like...
Clearly not a smart criminal. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. So anyway, thankfully, after this girl bit this guy's fingers hard enough, she was able to free herself. The college student would later provide a description of what this man had looked like to authorities. She explained that the man was, quote, pudgy and pot-bellied, looking like he was in his mid-30s with a slightly longer than average male haircut that sat just over his ears with it parted to one side. She also mentioned that he was wearing a windbreaker-style jacket and was driving a dark-colored sedan.
When you're trying to imagine people say you watch the Harry Potter movies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you read the books.
Mm-hmm.
You imagine those characters as people that you've seen before.
Yeah.
When I read this description of this guy,
mm-hmm.
it makes me think of something that I've seen before. And it makes me think back to that movie Prisoners and Paul Dano's character, just a pudgier version of him.
Yes. That's like the most spot on description of this guy. Like, that's exactly what I would imagine.
Yeah.
So there was also a witness who had seen this incident, and they had some information to provide as well. They told authorities that the taillights on the car were rectangular shaped and the interior light was blue. It has also been described that the car had a, quote, floor console, which for anyone unfamiliar with that term, it can also be described as a center console, like the thing you throw all your junk into in between the two front seats. It's believed that the car was a later model, darker colored Ford sedan. A sketch of the man was released to the public. I'll have it posted on our socials so everyone can take a look.
Not to even get me started on the floor console thing. I've never heard it been called that before in my life.
Me either. I had to Google it.
But how did this person that had this information, how could they tell that he had a floor console in his car?
I'm not entirely sure. I don't know if it was like, you know, there's obviously the girl that this happened to and then the witness. Like, you know that things get misreported. So, you know, maybe it was the girl who saw the floor console and then, you know, it was reported in one article that it was the witness that saw it or whatever it was. Like, you know, maybe the information got transposed between publications.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, you, right? I'm parked right next to you, and I'm the guy that just asked the girl to read the map. I go run and jump in my car. Are you going to be able to tell if there's a center console in my car?
Well, I mean, if he had his light on, maybe. Because he knew that the interior light was blue.
Oh, true.
So if you knew the color of the interior light, like, you probably could have seen, like, if you were on the side of the car rather than, like, behind the car, maybe you could have seen in through the window to say, oh, there's a floor console in there.
True. I totally forgot about the interior light being blue.
Also, can we just talk about this sketch?
Sure.
This sketch, I want everybody listening to go open up this sketch. Like, if you can just go onto Instagram, look at our Wicked Deeds page, and pull up the sketch and look at it. This girl describes this guy, first of all, as pudgy and pot-bellied. This sketch looks like a chiseled, fit individual.
It does.
In no way, shape, or form does this guy look pudgy or pot-bellied to me.
No, it's not the hairstyle I would picture either.
Right? So the mid-30s, that makes sense. I'd say the sketch looks like that. But she specifically said that his hair was like medium length and it like sat over his ears. And yes, of course, it's parted to the side in the picture, but that's like a fade. You got a fade going on there with like a side part. That's not what I'm picturing. No. A shitty bowl cut that your mom gave you.
Right.
Like,
I mean, you're thinking the 80s too.
Yeah.
Like, this looks like a slightly longer than normal modern haircut.
Yeah, this is like a guy from 2010.
This looks like a guy that had the line shaved into his haircut.
Yes.
You know what I mean? The part shaved in.
Yeah, he looks like someone you'd like go to the gym and see. Not like some guy that's got like a beer belly and, you know,
coming up to you, hey, can you help me look at my map?
Exactly. Like, that's not what that guy looks like. Right. So it just totally threw me. And it comes back to, you know, something you've said to me before, which is regarding, you know, how sketch artists can sometimes take liberties when it comes to what they're drawing. And I feel like whoever did the sketch kind of took a lot of liberties here, and it just doesn't feel like what she explained, or, you know, maybe there was some miscommunication or something, but it just doesn't feel the same in any way.
Right. Like when you see movies and TV shows of people doing sketch artist work, it's like the witness is sitting there, the sketch artist is doing his doodle or whatever, and then he turns and shows it to the person. And who knows if that's actually what happens, or at least what happened in this instance. This guy could have just taken what this witness said and then created what he wanted, or created what he envisioned. And what I envision is not necessarily what he envisioned, just based off of what she said. So if there's not the oversight of the witness saying, no, that's not what he looked like, and changing it in real time like that, then you end up with, you know, a sketch that could not be very accurate to what this person actually looked like. Yeah,
exactly. So once this creep flees the campus, he was apparently then seen speeding along Route 2 in Florida by a police officer who was posted in the area. But right as that vehicle passed, that officer was dispatched to a disturbance, and it was not the attempted kidnapping which had just occurred. That call hadn't come in yet. So the officer had to leave his post and head to this other call rather than head after the speeding car. The officer involved would later speak with the North Adams transcript, and there's a passage in the article that described what took place. It stated, quote, Williamstown Police Sergeant Vincent Zoito was in the perfect position to intercept the car on Main Street that night. But before the call went out on the attempted abduction, Zoito was sent to investigate a disturbance that turned out to be nothing, end quote.
What are the odds that this cop is posted in a spot, this thing happens, this car flies by the cop, which he probably normally would have conducted some type of motor vehicle stop with him, but then gets a different call. Whereas if this possible abduction or attempted abduction came in, and then he sees a car fleeing from the direction where the call just came in, he could have been like, I see this car fleeing right now. He could have made that connection and been like, oh, I'm going to conduct a stop. But generally, when you get dispatched to a disturbance, it's like, all the people that are involved are still there. That's why there's a disturbance.
Exactly.
Versus an attempted abduction where somebody just fled the scene. You get somebody fleeing the scene and a car fucking flying way faster than it should be from the direction that the abduction just took place in. It's like, shit.
Exactly. And the other thing, too, when I read that quote, you know, I had previously mentioned that it was Route 2 that he was driving down, but in the quote, it says Main Street. So I looked into that and I was like, well, is this the same road? Like, is it also called Main Street? I mean, we have to think this was over 40 years ago, so street names change. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be the same one. But when I was looking at, if you just search, like, Williams College campus directions to Florida, Massachusetts, like where the Barefoot Peddler was, it's Route 2. So it is the same road. And you would be, you know, when you leave the campus, you're heading down Route 2 and you'd wind up in Florida. It's a complete and total straight shot.
So essentially you're thinking that this guy tried to abduct the girl at the college, fled.
Yep.
And then if he just kept going straight on that road, he's driving by the Barefoot Peddler. And that's why this could be linked?
Yes. That's what I'm thinking anyway. I mean, maybe police were thinking the same thing, but that's where I'm going with it.
I think it's a good avenue to go down.
Right off the bat, authorities did look into the idea that there may be a connection between the two cases. I mean, honestly, it really is just too much of a coincidence that this guy would try and kidnap a girl right around Lynne's age and then was seen driving right towards the store she's working at. And then less than 45 minutes later, Lynne is abducted. It just smells fishy. Regarding the timing of the abduction, in an article published in the Berkshire Eagle in 2005, authorities stated, quote, a short time after that, Lynn Burdick was abducted. We always thought and still do think there's a connection, end quote. Even with authorities blitzing out the sketch of this individual who may have been responsible, there were never any arrests made in the case of the attempted abduction, and no clear links between the two have ever been determined. As the Burdick family's hopes of Lynne's speedy return waned, they knew in their hearts she never would have chosen to run away. Not only was she responsible, but she'd also been helping to take care of her mother, supporting those charities, and had even been scheduled to roller skate in a benefit for one of those charities in Pittsfield just 3 days after she disappeared. Rufus and Dorothy Burdick, Lynne's parents, had decided they would perform their own searches to try and cover a wider area than just the locale around the Berkshires. It's reported that they would go on to search nearby cities like that of Springfield and Boston, thinking that their girl might have been there. Lynne's father had told the Berkshire Eagle, quote, I remember going down to Springfield one night, searching around the streets. Nothing, end quote. One might wonder why her father would even consider that she could have made her way all the way to Boston, over 130 miles or a 2.5-hour drive from her hometown. His reasoning is that he, quote, had a suspicion that somebody grabbed her and put her to work on the streets, end quote.
I understand his reason of thinking this because as a parent, the last thing you want to think of is that your child has been murdered. But I don't think that this is what happened.
Yeah, what I was thinking was more along the lines of maybe human trafficking. I'm not sure like how prevalent that was back then, but you'd have to think that that could also be an option, not necessarily sex work, but it could have been something to do with human trafficking. And, you know, maybe they had a specific type of girl that they were looking for and thought like, oh, if I can grab a girl from a small town, like no one's going to notice or something. I don't know. They could have some dumb idea. But just looking at it from like my perspective, like I know Rufus said, you know, he thought that she had been put to work on the streets, but me looking from the outside, looking in all these years later, I would think more along the lines of if this were a possibility, I would lean towards human trafficking.
Right. She'd have to be removed, you know, a substantial distance from her home, because if somebody had taken her to Boston and put her on the streets to work, the second that she feels like she's not under the watchful eye of whoever abducted her, she's going to make a run for it, and she's going to be able to reasonably, easily get back to her home.
She could hitchhike.
Right, or she could just find a police officer and say, hey, this guy abducted me and put me to work on the street.
Mm-hmm.
The type of people that, if a pimp was looking for somebody to put out on the street and to control and to make money off and stuff, they're looking for people that are down on their luck, and they can essentially be like a savior to them and say, hey, you come with me, I'll put you to work, you'll make money, you'll be able to put food on the table. It's like a last resort, and these people are like, okay, I'll do that. And then they kind of get sucked into that, and then it's almost like a never-ending, I can't get out of it type deal because, now this person has control over them, controls their money, controls what they can do, and they have nothing else.
Yeah.
Outside of the human trafficking where she'd be taken away, removed, hooked on drugs, and then like forced to stay type thing. I don't think that the chance of them finding Lynn in a city in Massachusetts are slim to none.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just, that desperation as a parent, and more than anything, if she's missing, there's still hope. And, just hoping that she would come home one day and thinking of, as horrible as it is, best case scenario, like her, unfortunately, potentially going through that would be better than her being dead.
Right. She can still come back and she's still alive.
Exactly. Yeah. So with no sign of Lynn and no leads strong enough to pursue wholeheartedly, authorities wound up working leads they'd received from psychics. It was reported that police would go on to search what's known as the Hoosick Tunnel, which is basically a railway tunnel that was built in 1875 within the Berkshires. Britannica.com defines the tunnel as a, quote, railway tunnel that runs through Hoosick Mountain of the Berkshire Hills, east of North Adams, Massachusetts, the first major rock tunnel built in the United States. Hoosick Tunnel was built to provide a rail connection between Boston and Upper New York State, end quote. The psychic that gave the tip about Lynn potentially being in that tunnel had mentioned that authorities should search a mile into it, starting at the eastern entrance. But authorities garnered nothing from this search, and as you might have guessed, the psychic's powers provided no value. As the investigation continued, authorities would uncover some interesting information about a group of individuals that Lynn may have spent time with the day she went missing that hopefully might know more than they realized. It's discovered that on Saturday the 17th, Lynn didn't just go to work for her shift. She'd apparently attended a party that afternoon at a place known as the Florida Lounge. But like everything else in this case, the interviews conducted didn't provide investigators with any additional information or leads to work. And from what I can tell, authorities would discover that not one person they questioned had any recollection of Lynn being there, and if she was, they can't remember what she did, who she talked to, or any plans she may have made with partygoers. So with none of that being nailed down and no one saying anything to lead police to believe that she may have had any other plans, it just feels like this is another reason to add to the growing list regarding why she wouldn't have left of her own volition. Not only did authorities get wind of these potential party witnesses, but they would also learn that there was a group of teenagers spending time across the street from the Barefoot Peddler that same night. An officer had mentioned that when he passed by the area around 7 p.m., he remembered seeing the kids there and alerted authorities working Lynn's case. It's been reported that detectives would attempt to question these teens as well to find out if they had seen anything taking place across the street that evening. But, of course, nothing came from that questioning either. As years went by and the leads continued to come in, albeit slower, authorities would follow up on everything that landed on their desks. But by 1985, investigators felt as though their search for Lynn had stalled out. Authorities had stated in local publications, quote, "At this point, we're at a standstill. It seems to have petered out," end quote. Lynn's case may not have been spread across the headlines anymore, but that doesn't mean that locals had forgotten about her. In August of 1985, residents in Florida, Massachusetts would come together yet again and create something beautiful in Lynn's name. With the interest that was earned from the $2,500 in reward money they'd garnered early on in her disappearance, they would use that to create a scholarship in Lynn's name, titled the Lynn Burdick Memorial Award. Nearly $800 had been earned from interest in the account, and friends and family wanted to put that money to good use.
$800 in interest?
Yes.
That's ridiculous.
I want to know what kind of account that was.
I know, seriously, we need one now.
What is that, 20 some odd percent?
It's like 30% interest.
That's stupid. I mean, it's not stupid. That's wonderful.
I wish it was
so
the case.
Wonderful. I wish that was the way life worked.
Yeah.
Anywho. As multiple agencies began working together over the years, there seemed to be some differences of opinion regarding what was believed to have happened to Lynn Burdick. The police department working her case seemed to see things more along the lines of a murder, whereas the Crime Prevention and Control Unit, who'd become involved at some point in the investigation, believed that Lynne may have still been alive, even though they did agree that she was abducted.
I think I'd have to side with police on this one, because I don't know who the hell the Crime Prevention and Control Unit is, but it sounds like a neighborhood watch type association.
Well, I looked it up. I was like, is this like a particular department, like maybe within Massachusetts State Police or something? Like, is there a unit called this? And when you think about it, it's like crime prevention. So obviously they're trying to make sure crime doesn't happen and control that, right? So neighborhood watch does make sense. And that's kind of what it seems like just based on Googling it. There's no particular department within like state police or anything else. Like there's some that like maybe you could try and correlate it, but it doesn't seem like it's legit. So if I had to guess, this was probably like maybe even the people that all came together to do that fundraising for the money. And they were like, we're also this group, you know, like I'm not entirely sure. Like, is it an agency? I don't really know.
No, I mean, if it was an agency, it would have said, even though Florida, Massachusetts police don't agree, state police officials or the state police crime prevention and control unit states, it's like these are concerned citizens that have formed their own group of whatever.
Yeah.
To try and, you know, impact their community in a certain way.
Yeah, no, that does make sense.
So just to step on that again, I don't put much weight in what they're saying when police are saying one thing and they're saying something else.
Well, I would think that the police would have way more investigative tactics under their belt, and they've likely seen this more. They know what to look for. And in their minds, you know, if there's no sign of her, she's probably no longer with us.
Right. And they're putting out an opinion in an official capacity.
Yeah.
This is a group of concerned citizens' opinion.
Exactly. No, I totally agree. Regardless of the fact that police believed Lynne had been kidnapped, the case was still not deemed a homicide, and from what I can tell, still isn't to this day. Authorities still continued to do their due diligence, though, with any new leads that came across their desks. It was reported that whenever unidentified remains were found that may have matched Lynne's description, authorities would have the dental records tested against hers to see if they were a match. At least one of the times this testing was done had been publicized. In 1990, a portion of a human jawbone had been found in the woods of Massachusetts. Pathologists would go on to test those remains against Lynne's dental records they had on file, but unfortunately, there was no match, and the mystery of what may have happened to Lynne remained. A new lead would make its way onto headlines, though, when in 1995, Lynne's father, Rufus, received a letter telling him about what the author of that letter believed may have happened to his own daughter. As soon as Rufus received the letter, he brought it straight to authorities. He wasn't going to mess around when it came to the possibility of someone knowing what happened to Lynne. This letter was postmarked from Boston, Massachusetts, and the mysterious writer described a disturbing situation. The letter explained that the author's daughter had been abducted and subsequently murdered by a man, whom he named specifically from North Adams. The details of who this person was have never been released publicly, though, so we don't have a name for the potential suspect in question. And from what I can tell, the man that was named in that letter had had some run-ins with police, and they were familiar with him, and it seems like he wasn't the greatest of dudes. But once the letter had been received, authorities would go on to plead with the public to hopefully reach the author, and they asked him to come forward to tell them more about what he knew. Unfortunately, though, the writer never came forward nor revealed themselves to authorities, the public, or even Rufus for that matter. It's unclear if the whole thing was just a hoax or if there was merit behind it. Regardless, police did look into that lead and questioned the man named, but found absolutely nothing to be able to connect him with Lynne's disappearance. Now, there have been a few theories put forward regarding what happened to Lynne, whether she was killed or may have still been alive, and some other cases that may be connected to her disappearance. And those cases have led some to believe that she may have crossed paths with a serial killer. 2 young girls from neighboring towns in Florida had been abducted and murdered in the mid-70s, and those cases have been compared to Lynne's disappearance in recent years. I think it's important to work through each one before coming to any sort of conclusion on if there's a potential link between the 3. Let's start with Kim Benoit. She was an 18-year-old girl who was living life day by day. But because of this, to no fault of her own, it seemed as though police weren't overly concerned when she didn't return home one night in 1974.
What do you mean by living day by day?
Well, she didn't have a job at the time. She was collecting unemployment. She wasn't in school. And I guess she was like living with a friend, not exactly like couch surfing, but she didn't exactly have like a permanent place of residence either. So kind of like that.
Kind of like a drifter, but she wasn't a drifter as in she traveled all these places, just a drifter as in, I do whatever.
She just kind of did her own thing, and that's what she wanted to do, and more power to her.
Right.
Anyway, on the evening of November 1st, 1974, Kim had attended a dance located at the Sons of Italy Lodge in North Adams, Massachusetts. It's reported that while she was at the dance, she'd spilled a drink on her dress and was planning to head back to her friend's house located on Sutton Ave to change. However, this would be the last time Kim was ever seen alive. When she didn't return home the following morning, November 2nd, her mother reported her missing. But a missing persons report wasn't actually filed by police until 2 days later on November 4th. Based on what I can tell, and like I just mentioned to John a few minutes ago, Kim wasn't in school or holding down a steady job, and she was collecting unemployment. You might assume that because of this, that may be why authorities waited to officially file the report, as they might have expected her to return soon. Not only that, but authorities had stated they received several credible tips stating that Kim had been seen in the North Adams area. So, at first glance, it was believed that she was kind of just off doing her own thing. However, when she failed to pick up her weekly unemployment check, that's when things started to get more serious. Just over 2 weeks after she was last seen, on November 16th, 1974, a hunter would find her body at the bottom of an embankment in the woods in Florida, Massachusetts, which wasn't too far from where Lynn Burdick would later work at the Barefoot Peddler. Her body was found lying atop a heap of leaves, fully clothed, with no indication that she'd been sexually assaulted. Once her body was brought in for an autopsy, it was determined that Kim had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, but her cause of death had been strangulation. And then, just 2 years after Kim was killed, another young woman was killed. Her name was Cynthia Krizak, and she was just 17 years old. Around 8 p.m. on October 7th, 1976, she was headed towards the Williams College Library to study. If you caught the connection, Williams College is the same campus where that young woman would nearly be abducted 6 years later, the same night Lynne was. Cynthia's family expected her to be home after her study sesh, but she never showed. It appeared as though she had been abducted somewhere near the library on the campus grounds.
So I'm curious, is Dodd House, where that other girl was almost abducted from, anywhere near the library?
So I did some sleuthing, and I went on the Williams College campus website, and I was looking for their campus map. Obviously, it's 2022. It's probably going to look a little bit different than it did back in 1976, but you have to assume like a lot of the big buildings are probably the same. And there is Dodd House listed on there. So I was like, all right, let me see, is there a nearby library? And it seems like one of the bigger ones on campus is the Sawyer Library. And it's literally a street over from the Dodd House dormitories. So you're thinking this is a relatively good-sized campus, and there's only a street between these two. So yeah, they are close by.
So in that respect, I'd have to say, if they're both close by, what do they have in common? Being in the same general vicinity to each other, there has to be easy access out of the campus or to a main road or something that would lead somebody to say, I'm going to try and abduct somebody from Dodd House. I am going to abduct somebody from the library, because you're not going to do that from, the depths of the campus.
Exactly, and they are. They're literally right on the east side of the campus, and it has very easy access, probably like less than a 30-second drive to get from either the library or the dorms right onto like a main road, which seems like most of those roads coming off the campus connect right to Route 2.
Which is where that speeding car drove by the sergeant the night Lynne went missing.
Exactly.
Interesting.
After several weeks of searching, Cynthia's body would be found, also in an embankment in the woods of Windsor, Massachusetts, approximately 15 miles from her hometown. Her body was located on October 31st, 1976, just over 3 weeks after she'd been kidnapped. When looking at both Cynthia and Kim's cases, there are significant similarities. When the ME performed the autopsy for Cynthia, it's determined that she too had been strangled to death. Her body was fully clothed, outside of her being barefoot, which I don't believe Kim was, and there were again no indicators of sexual assault.
So now that you've kind of gone through, where both girls were found, how both of them were killed, and that there was no sexual assault that took place, I can see where people would say, oh, maybe a serial killer. Because it's evident, at least to me, that murder was the sole motivation here.
Yeah.
This person abducted these girls and set out to kill them, not to, rape them and then subsequent to the rape, not wanting them to be able to tell anybody about what happened, killing them there. So I can see why it would be linked to the potential of a serial killer, or at least somebody that has, a motivation to kill. I don't know what the definition of serial killer is. Can you kill 2 people and be a serial killer?
I think it's 3.
It's 3. So,
but if you're connecting Lynn and if you're considering that maybe she had also been murdered, then you're kind of there.
Sure, I get that, and I can see, it could have been the same person that operated in that general area for all of these women. It could have been the same guy that tried to abduct the girl from Dodd House, but she was able to get away.
Yep.
The only thing is, these women were found not long after they were killed.
Yeah.
Whereas clearly Lynn hasn't been found yet.
Exactly. And I think, if these women had been sexually assaulted, sometimes, I know I've watched way too many crime shows in my day, but a lot of times it's an afterthought type of thing. Your sole purpose is not to murder. But then I also think, if I'm going back to Criminal Minds and profiling and stuff, I think, was the strangulation the sexual gratification? So then my mind starts going in those ways. Are there connections there? Is it someone that they should be looking at that was impotent or something like that? So those are different leads to work for investigators.
Right. Makes sense.
I mean, overall, when really looking at the 2 cases, the similarities are pretty chilling. They're both found in an embankment in the woods, no signs of sexual assault, both strangled to death. Not only that, they're also similar in age and looks.
So, do we know if the girl from the Dodd House looked anything like the 2 girls that were murdered?
Well, they never released her name. I don't believe if they're not releasing her name, they're not going to release her picture or her description. So I don't think anybody has ever known who that girl was. So I don't have her to compare to. But, looking at Cynthia and Kim and Lynn, they all had brown hair, similar body types. They're all practically the same age. Cynthia was 17, but Kim and Lynn were 18. I mean, there's a lot of similarities when you're looking at it.
Yeah, all from, a close enough area, too.
Exactly. Years down the line, the media began purporting that these cases may have been connected, and quite a few articles were published discussing all 3 cases together, including that of Lynn's. However, like John mentioned, the most distinct difference between them all is that Lynn has never been found. Based on what we just discussed a little bit ago, it seems as though the person who abducted Kim and Cynthia had a very clear motive in mind, and that was murder. And it doesn't seem like the culprit went to any crazy lengths to attempt to hide their bodies. So how is it that Lynn could have pretty much just vanished off the face of the earth, and after over a month of searches, no one would be able to find anything? Not one single piece of evidence to lead them to believe that Lynn was anywhere near Florida, Mass? Yet they find Kim and Cynthia's remains within a few weeks of when they were reported missing.
Yeah, and to think there were tons of resources used to try and find Lynn. At least 45 people were out there. They were using planes. They were using this, that, and the other thing. Whereas, a hunter stumbled upon one of these girls' bodies.
Yeah, exactly. You've got all these resources poured into finding this girl, and nothing comes of it. So that right there, as much as there are a lot of similarities, that kind of pulls me back from it. And it's how is there a connection?
Right.
Or how could there be a connection?
Right. There are a lot of things that line up, but when there's something so drastic that doesn't, it almost throws a wrench right in the whole thing where, you're hoping, okay, maybe we can make a connection here, here, and here. But then when there's something that's just so vastly different from the rest of them, it's there were connections, but unfortunately, sometimes that's just the way it is.
Regarding the possibility of all of these cases being connected to the same perpetrator, the Berkshire County DA, David Capeless, had stated in 2005, quote, "You always consider that, but at this point, no link has been made," end quote.
And that just goes back to what we were saying. There are so many similarities, close proximity, the way some of these girls were killed, how they were abducted. One was abducted on a campus and killed. The other one was attempted to be abducted. And then the perpetrator who tried to abduct this girl is fleeing towards the same direction where another girl goes missing that same exact night. You can't let your hopes and aspirations of wanting there to be something connecting them blind you to the fact where it might just not happen.
Exactly. But as I continued my research, I stumbled upon a connection that might be even stronger. And that's regarding a convicted murderer known as Leonard, aka Lenny, Paradiso. The potential connection to him in Lynn's case isn't reported on until much later, literally 2008. While no clear links have been reported, that doesn't mean it's something to just gloss over. I'll give you as brief a rundown as I can of Lenny's crimes and the possible connections he may have had to the Florida area and all 3 crimes we've discussed already. So, on August 12, 1979, a young woman by the name of Marie Iannuzzi had attended a wedding reception in the Saugus, Massachusetts area. At some point that afternoon, something happened to her and she isn't seen again. 2 days later, her body would be discovered behind a previously abandoned lobster store. It was discovered that she'd been raped and her cause of death was strangulation.
So right off the bat, I'm thinking the 2 girls that were found weren't raped. They weren't sexually assaulted. They were strangled. As sick as it is to say, strangulation is a common way of people killing people.
Mm-hmm.
Often men killing women.
Yes, agreed.
So, I think that when we're first looking to remove a connection based on something that's not similar, the fact that this woman was raped leads me to believe that I'm
questioning the connection.
I'm questioning the connection.
Okay. So I said that, he could potentially be connected to Cynthia and Kim. I don't want you to totally take them out of the equation here, but I want you to keep them in the back of your mind. But don't forget that there's the potential that Lynn could be connected to Paradiso and not connected to Cynthia or Kim.
Okay.
So just keep an open mind and let's just work through him.
Fair enough.
Okay. So when Marie's body was discovered, she'd still been wearing the red wrap dress and jewelry she'd worn to the wedding just a few days prior. However, she had no shoes on her feet. Investigators worked the case for a few years until 1982, when charges were brought against Leonard Paradiso in connection with Marie's murder. He was charged with rape and first-degree murder. Timothy Burke, the assistant DA, would prosecute Paradiso, but the jury was only able to find him guilty of second-degree murder. But he was still sentenced to life in prison with eligibility for parole by 2028. So, if you're familiar with Massachusetts, you're likely thinking, okay, Britt, Saugus is literally 2.5 hours from Florida. And this crime took place in '79. That's not during any of the years these other women we've discussed were either murdered or went missing. So, how in the heck is there a connection here? Don't worry, I'm getting there. Years after Paradiso went to prison, the DA that prosecuted him, Timothy Burke, wrote a book regarding Lenny entitled The Paradiso Files, Boston's Unknown Serial Killer. In this book, he'd alluded to the fact that Lenny was to blame in a series of other murders, one of which being about another woman that I haven't spoken about yet, Joan Webster. Joan was a 25-year-old woman who was originally from New Jersey but was living in Massachusetts. Over Thanksgiving weekend in November of 1981, she'd traveled to visit her family in Jersey and was on her way back once the holiday festivities were over. She was last seen leaving Logan International Airport that weekend and was never seen again. Once Leonard Paradiso had been incarcerated in connection with Marie's case, authorities began looking into Joan's disappearance to see if there were any similarities. Come to find out, an informant came forward stating that Paradiso bragged while in prison regarding Joan's potential murder. It was reported that Lenny had met Joan at a terminal in Logan Airport while she was waiting for her bags, and he somehow was able to convince her to come with him. After this, he was then able to get her onto his boat after brandishing a fake firearm. The Boston Globe published what happened next in an article from 1985. It's regarding what Paradiso allegedly told this informant. It stated that he, quote, forced Harvard University student Joan Webster to board his boat, raped her, struck her on the head with a whiskey bottle, and threw her overboard, end quote. It was also confirmed publicly by authorities that they had in some way tied Paradiso to Joan's murder, but from what I can tell, the waters were a bit murky regarding the ability to charge him. Some compelling evidence, though, was the fact that Joan's wallet was found 100 yards from where Marie's body had been found behind that old lobster establishment 2 years prior. Not only that, but apparently the informants were able to provide a location of where he supposedly sunk his own boat, the one he lured Joan onto, and where this fake firearm would be. Authorities were able to recover both of these items. Based on an article from 1985, authorities were attempting to link him to Joan's suspected murder by requesting to surgically remove a piece of glass from his finger, presumably from a whiskey bottle, and test it. It seems as though they wanted to compare the glass against several whiskey bottles that were found in the submerged boat they pulled out of the water a few years prior. I can't quite tell if they were able to get this evidence from Paradiso, though. However, in 1990, 5 years after this request for evidence was made, Joan Webster's remains were finally located. Among what was found laid the jawbone that authorities in Lynne's case had compared her dental records to. Clearly, the story Paradiso told about throwing her overboard doesn't seem accurate, but regardless of where he put her body, at least she was found and could be laid to rest 9 years later. After years of reviewing evidence and attempting to piece together enough of a case to try and convict Leonard Paradiso, he would die in prison from testicular cancer in 2008.
So, did they ever release what the proof was that they were trying to tie Lenny to Joan's murder?
No, unfortunately, but it's been said that there's overwhelming clues, but there's just not enough to charge him.
I'm also interested, I'm not saying Lenny was a good guy, but he had this guy so enthralled with his life that he wrote this book, The Unknown Serial Killer type thing, The Paradiso Files.
Yeah.
Original title. But he's only been charged with one murder.
Correct.
So, do you think that's liable to say, oh, he's the serial killer nobody knows about, and there's no proof that he's killed more than one person?
So first of all, he is a DA. He does have access to case files, I would assume, at least within his jurisdiction. So he probably was able to look through a bunch of things. And I am sure that, authorities knowing that Lenny was a piece of garbage were like, here you go, here's all our files, do what you can to connect him. So he probably did have legitimate proof, I would guess. But the thing that's funny about you saying that is I had read this article and I didn't even put it in here, but I probably should have. It's hilarious. I guess he actually tried to sue Timothy Burke for libel. And the judge just dismissed it and was like, bro, your reputation is shit. You are libel proof.
That's pretty bad then.
It is pretty bad. So, I would assume that he probably had a fair bit of evidence to come up with these claims and write an entire book on the guy.
Yeah.
So now that you have a brief explanation of what Leonard Paradiso did from 1979 to 1981, I'm sure you're wondering how he could possibly be connected to Lynn Burdick, the Florida-Massachusetts area, or even the two other women who were killed, Kim and Cynthia. Well, there are some interesting things that have been put out regarding his time spent in the Florida area. Apparently, he was an avid hunter who would spend a lot of his time hunting in the Berkshires, most notably during deer season. And deer season is important because that's when Kim Benoit was killed. It's reported that a search warrant was issued on Paradiso's girlfriend's home, and they located some photos of him, and one in particular stood out. It was a photo of Lenny in Florida during deer season the same year Kim was killed. So, due to the similarities between Kim and Cynthia's cases, one can only guess that the two could be related. If it's possible he killed Kim, then I think it's safe to say it might also be possible he killed Cynthia. Not only that, but he was also out of prison during the times that all of these murders were committed. He had been in jail for a short time in 1978 for an attempted rape, but was out by 79. Kim was killed in 74, Cynthia in 76, Marie in 79, Joan in 81, and then Lynn went missing in 82. The timeline for sure fits. For all we know, Paradiso could have also been the individual that attempted to abduct that girl from Williams College the same night that Lynn was abducted.
As I've said before, I am forever the skeptic, and I'm always looking for a way to rule something out unless it's proved otherwise. But the only thing that we know that this guy has truly done is he raped and murdered a girl, left behind the lobster store, and then he was doing time for an attempted rape. In both instances of the crimes that we know for sure happened, he raped or attempted to rape the girl. That seems like, why would he go and kill other people and not rape them?
Well, you don't know about Joan. In that supposed admission, he said that he had raped her. So those ones fit.
I'm thinking Kim and Cynthia.
Okay, so Kim and Cynthia might not be related. It could just be a total coincidence that he was in the Florida area hunting the same month that Kim was killed.
Yeah.
It could be total coincidence. But
he was in the Florida area, so he does have time.
He did spend time in the Florida area, and there's the potential that Lynn going missing, maybe he took an opportunity there, but didn't do anything to Kim or Cynthia. He didn't go to trial until July of 82 for Marie's murder. And Lynn went missing in April. So for all we know, he could have taken her all the way back to Boston and done something there.
Yeah,
and he's like, oh, I'm done in Florida. I'm going to head back over to Boston. And then she's unfortunately kind of gone in the wind. And, there's the potential that Kim and Cynthia totally aren't related in any way, shape, or form. But without knowing where Lynne is, you can't rule her out of either option, I don't think.
Yeah, I'm interested to read that terribly titled book, The Paradiso Files, just to see what type of connections
Have been made
here.
Yeah.
Or if it's like totally different characters that haven't even been mentioned type thing.
There are other women that have been brought up in recent years, but I think we already have so many stories here that it would have been a little overboard to go into all of these other ones. Like, we could absolutely do an entire episode on Leonard Paradiso and all of his crimes, but, you know, I don't like covering just serial killers. I want to focus on these victims, and I want to try and get down to the bottom of what's happening to Lynne, you know, but you can't look away from other potential connections as you are working through it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's the thing with unsolved cases, is that you need to look at things that occurred in the same area that have similar characteristics to the case that you're working, and to not talk about something just because it seems maybe not totally probable, but it's still close enough that there are some similarities. You'd just be doing a disservice to not talk about it, but my gut instinct is that he's probably not involved in Lynne's disappearance, at least. Okay.
The thing that I found most interesting, though, that I would counter what you're saying with, is the description that the girl from Dodd House gave to police of what this guy looked like. Everybody already knows our opinions on the sketch and how we don't believe it really matches that description. But if you look up a photo of Leonard Paradiso, I think he fits the description.
You think he matches the description of the sketch or what the girl said?
What the girl said. I don't think he looks anything like the sketch.
That sketch, I think, is just kind of useless.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be helpful. It wasn't helpful. Nobody came forward with any information.
Right. If you look at this particular picture of Lenny, he looks like a mix between Kenny Pont from New Bedford Highway and Joe Pesci from Goodfellas.
Yes, he does.
He's got that black suit jacket on. He's got, you know, the white button down with the collar kind of popped a little bit, not really. And, you know, that stereotypical mafia haircut where it's kind of puffy but black and slicked back a little bit.
But it covers his ears.
It covers his ears. It's slightly longer than what the average haircut probably looked like at the time. And he's got those chubby jowls.
Yep. That's the pudgy face right there. I mean, the description, if you just took her description and put it up against him and that chiseled looking sketch, I think most people would lean towards Lenny over the sketch.
Yeah.
Just based on what was described.
Right.
And just a funny thing to say is regarding Leonard, not only, so his name's Leonard, he's also nicknamed Lenny, but he's also nicknamed the Quahog.
The Quahog?
Yes.
Does this have some type of seafood reference?
Yeah, that lobster store, actually, that Marie's body was found behind, he used to work at that establishment. So there's like a huge connection, like probably the leads that police were working during the 3 years after the crime was committed. They were probably trying to find anyone that had been in the area. They probably came across him, and then they started to tie it together.
So maybe he fished for lobster,
and
that's why he had the boat.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, the Quahog was just his nickname because he was, you know, people come up with stupid names, but he was, you know, a seaman essentially.
Yes, exactly. And it's funny you say that because on top of all this guy absolutely seemed like the type that hated women. And I mean, I would think maybe he has some mommy issues, who knows? But what stuck out regarding all of that has to do with the name of his boat. It was named Malafamina, which in English translates to evil woman. I think that speaks for itself.
Yeah, I think he may have had it out for some of his victims.
Absolutely. He sucks.
He sucked.
Yes, he's dead, yes. As good as Paradiso might look for these other crimes, there's certainly the potential that he had nothing to do with Lynne's disappearance. The number one difference between all of these murders and Lynne's case is the lack of a body. As John and I have said numerous times already, she has never been found, and that's the biggest difference. If he wasn't attempting to conceal any of the other women he killed, why would he all of a sudden change that with Lynne? I think overall, the potential link between the girl who escaped the clutches of the man that tried to kidnap her at Williams College and Lynne's disappearance feels far more promising. I mean, honestly, I can't say it enough. What are the freaking odds that the same night this girl is almost abducted, another girl is successfully kidnapped just under 40 minutes later? Like, Why don't we just time it out a bit here? Williams College campus is in Williamstown, Massachusetts, just a town over from Florida. It would only take about 20 minutes to drive from each location. You might think that when the alleged abductor had left the school, maybe he was reeling from his inability to kidnap the co-ed and he takes a few minutes to compose himself. Maybe he drives towards Florida and he winds up seeing this practically deserted little shop and figures he's going to head in there. Whether the plan was to try and find another girl to abduct, who knows? But maybe he went in there to grab a bandage or a drink or smokes or something after this whole debacle at the college. And then when he gets there, he stumbles upon Lynne, a quiet, sweet girl who maybe he believed wouldn't fight back like the other girl had. So he took the opportunity to take her. I think when you get right down to it, it's the timing of everything that's the most wild. It's just like the circumstances are insane and the similarities are nearly impossible to ignore. Something that I think could be helpful would have been those teens that were reported to be hanging out across the street from the country store that night. If these kids had been outside or even looking out a window, what could they have seen? Did they maybe notice a dark-colored sedan? Did they see a pot-bellied dude heading into the store? Or could they have seen something far worse and maybe even witnessed Lynne being taken from the store? I know authorities mentioned that their questioning of these teens was unproductive, but maybe these kids were scared back then. I've never seen it mentioned if they were male or female, but you'd have to think, if they were women, young females in the area might have been terrified of something similar happening to them. And honestly, I don't blame them.
And even if they weren't females, if they were males, like, some people just have a bad connotation with police and they don't want to talk to them. So they could have known something and just said, you know what, I'm not saying anything because I don't like cops.
And I feel like that's a valid point that we hear a lot. But within an 8-year span of time, 2 girls were murdered, 1 was abducted, and another had gotten away from a potential abductor by the skin of her teeth, all in neighboring towns. I don't doubt that someone may not want to say what they knew because of fear of it getting out that it was them snitching on what they saw. And who knows, this perpetrator could then target them next. But that's what's beautiful about the passage of time. Now, in 2022, 40 years later, what is there to be afraid of? Another thing to consider is that maybe none of these scenarios are even remotely close to what happened that night. Maybe that guy who tried to abduct the girl from Williams College was just speeding towards Florida because he wanted to get out of the area as fast as possible. For all we know, Lynne could have made plans with someone at that party she was at earlier in the afternoon on the 17th, and maybe they came to pick her up at the store and something sketchy went down and she was abducted and then they did who even knows what to her. Or what if what Rufus Burdick said holds merit? That Lynne had been abducted and forced into sex work or human trafficking. If her abduction was part of a larger criminal ring, then they probably had the ability to easily remove her from the state of Massachusetts quickly, and all of the searches for her would never have yielded anything because she was never anywhere nearby. Her parents always held out hope that she might still be alive, though. Her father told the Berkshire Eagle, quote, "As far as we know, she's still alive. Until they find her body, and as long as they haven't found anything, she's still alive," end quote. Not only that, but he would always leave the outside light on for her, just in case. After all that time had passed, maybe she might make her way back home. He told the North Adams transcript, quote, "The yard light is still on for her. When she would come home, she'd usually come up and over the lawn, so that's still on. It will always be on. I'd like to know what happened, and hopefully she's still alive, somehow, somewhere out there," end quote. If you couldn't already tell, there's been a significant amount of speculation in Lynne's case about any possible connection to other abductions or murders that had taken place in the area, or regarding individuals that could have committed said crime as they frequented the area. A lot of the family had been divided on their feelings of speculation over the years. Regarding the scenario with Lenny Paradiso, Lynne's cousin Roy had told the Berkshire Eagle in 2008, quote, "I think it's wrong to create a scenario for these people who lost Lynne all these years ago. Now they have to sit here and think, did this happen to my daughter? The same thing that happened to Iannuzzi? Theoretically, it could have been a number of people," end quote. I don't blame him for being upset, but at the same time, I do think it's important to put out all the evidence and all the possibilities so that if someone somewhere knows anything, that they can come forward. If you don't talk about it or report it to the public, how is it that anyone with information that may be helpful would even know to come forward if they didn't realize what they knew had value?
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, it comes back to like the whole speculation piece. Some people like speculation, some people don't. You really have to find a happy medium with it because you want to speculate because there are so many possibilities. The reason that that speculation is a thing is because it's an unsolved case. So you want to think, if you're going to put something out there, you want to have some merit to it. You don't want to just be like, oh, well, maybe one of those kids that was across the from the store went in there and abducted her and killed her and took her somewhere.
Exactly. That's silly speculation.
Right.
There's nothing behind that.
Right. There's nothing behind it. So you don't just make things up, but you need to infer based on the data that's available to you or things that happened during the time to come to, something that's an actual possibility.
Yeah, and Lynn's father was thinking the same way. His feelings on the matter kind of seemed to differ a bit from Roy's. In that same article, Rufus stated, quote, "It's more information for us, and I guess anything helps," end quote.
Knowledge is power. And for Roy to say that, don't say this because then, it's going to put ideas in the family's head or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
If your daughter has gone missing, you think that they're not already thinking of every fucking possibility imaginable?
Exactly. Of course, we know that he had hope and he truly wants her to be alive. He wanted her to be alive all those years ago. But at the end of the day, I don't think that they're naive to the fact that it is a possibility. Like, you have to have hope. Hope is important. And you hear about cases where, it does turn out in a more positive way.
I think what it comes down to is that Roy's feelings were rooted in the idea that he didn't want to cause any more pain to the family in adding new ideas to their head. But I think it's naive to think that the family hasn't already gone through every possibility. Somebody did this, somebody did that.
Mm-hmm.
They're already thinking that.
I agree. Yeah.
So to be like, oh, it's going to hurt their feelings or it's going to cause them more pain. It's like, what more pain can you cause? Their daughter's already gone. If they can have more information to kind of lead them down a road that maybe they'll start their own investigation on and follow up on,
mm-hmm.
then whatever. The more information that they have, the better off they are.
Yeah, and it seems like Rufus felt that way. So, right. I think that's good. Overall, though, Lynn's disappearance did deeply affect the Burdick family and the small town of Florida. It's reported in an article from May 1982 that just a few weeks after Lynne was taken, her cousins had closed the doors of the Barefoot Peddler for good. It had been for sale for a year prior to Lynn's disappearance, so it seemed like this may have been the final straw for them to make the decision to close up shop. Her father would go on to retire just a year after she went missing as he was struggling with health issues, and we know her mother suffered from a chronic illness as well. Even though the couple's health wasn't great, they still did what they could to continue the fight to find their missing daughter. Unfortunately, Dorothy would go on to pass away in 1990, and in 2012, Rufus passed as well. Brian, Lynn's brother, told the Berkshire Eagle, quote, "Over all these years, if she was alive, there would have been some word from her, if there was even a slight chance of getting some word out. She wasn't the type of girl who deserved anything like this," end quote. For a little while, it seemed as though not too many people were discussing Lynn Burdick and the circumstances surrounding her disappearance. But in recent years, the case has been taken on by the Massachusetts State Police, and they've assigned a detective to work her case. And just last year, in 2021, her niece Debbie stepped up to the plate to try and find answers in the 4-decades-old case. She'd created a GoFundMe to attempt to garner funds to be able to put up billboards locally to get people talking about her aunt's case again. She'd been just a year old when her aunt went missing all those years ago. Her attempt to earn the money she needed for the billboards was successful, with nearly $1,800 being donated from people who hoped to see the case finally solved. Debbie told the Berkshire Eagle, quote, "We were all overwhelmed by the support. It's amazing to know how much people cared about Lynn," end quote. In that same article, she went on to say, quote, "My grandpa and grandma passed, and they didn't know what happened. Somebody out there knows something. Maybe they'll decide it's time to say something." If you know anything about what happened to Lynn Burdick, please contact Massachusetts State Police, Berkshire Barracks at 413-499-1112. Thank you all so much for tuning in every week. We're so happy to have you here. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review before you go and follow us on our socials.
You can follow us on Instagram at wicked.deeds.podcast and on Twitter at wickeddeeds. Don't forget to visit our website, wickeddeedspodcast.com, to take a look at any photos from this episode and view our source material.
But most importantly, tune in next week for an all-new episode.